Did DeAndre Hopkins make the right choice signing with the Tennessee Titans? We talk about that and so much more coming up next year on Locked On NFL.
You are Locked On NFL, your daily NFL podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into another edition of the Locked On NFL podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I am your host, Kevin Oestreicher, one of the many NFL experts here on our network. We're free and available, all podcasting platforms, including in video form on YouTube. You can subscribe for free, both video form and audio form. And today's episode of Locked On NFL is brought to you by LinkedIn. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates who want to talk to you faster. Post your job for free at LinkedIn.com/LockedOnNFL. It's LinkedIn.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. But we take you through the biggest stories here on Locked On NFL every single weekday throughout the league. And there was a lot to dive into. Training camp starting up for some teams here, but we got to talk about DeAndre Hopkins. Hopkins signing with Tennessee Titans, and here to talk about that with us in this first segment is Tyler Rowland, and if DeAndre Hopkins made the right choice signing with the Titans. We'll get into that in the first part of the show. Then in the second part of the show, we'll dive into a conversation with Tony Wiggins of Locked On Jaguars about Evan Engram and him getting a massive tight end contract. Then finally, we'll talk with Patricia Traina of Locked On Giants about the Saquon situation and getting an update there. Obviously, the show comes out before the 4 p.m. franchise tag deadline, so we'll talk about what could happen if Saquon does not get tagged versus if he does. So we'll get into all of that. So first, we'll get into our conversation here with Tyler Rowland of Locked On Titans about DeAndre Hopkins. It finally happened. DeAndre Hopkins has a new place to play. That place, the Tennessee Titans. Here to talk about that with me, Tyler Rowland, the host of Locked On Titans. And Tyler, I know you've been on this for a while. You know, you had predicted DeAndre Hopkins, or at least had thought DeAndre Hopkins could sign with the Titans. That officially became official on Sunday. 2-year deal, $26 million here. I think it's a fit for DeAndre Hopkins where it makes sense. You know, obviously the contract is, money talks, but he gets an opportunity to play with Treylon Burks, Ryan Tannehill, and get a lot of targets in that offense. So was this shocking to you, or were you expecting it to happen?
I don't think it was. I mean, anytime big news happens with something like this where you don't know exactly where it's going to go, I mean, New England was a viable option as well. And Hopkins could have looked at the money he was getting from New England and Tennessee, even though more lucrative, and been like, this still doesn't cross that threshold. I would rather go to Buffalo or Kansas City and take a small deal to try to win. So you knew that there were other options in there. But at the end of the day, shock, no, because the Titans did always make sense. Once we found out, once the reporting was there that Hopkins didn't want to take a low-end deal to ring chase, once we knew that Hopkins wanted a little bit of cash, I think at that moment in time, the Titans were the clear best option for him. Only looks like Tennessee and New England were willing to pony up a little bit of dough and make it worth his while. And when you compare New England and Tennessee, I mean, Patriots fans can disagree, and that's fine, but I think Ryan Tannehill is a better quarterback. He's certainly a more proven quarterback than Mac Jones. While Bill Belichick is maybe the best coach of all time, Mike Vrabel is a pretty good head coach, and Mike Vrabel and DeAndre Hopkins had a great relationship. After Vrabel was hired in 2018, Hopkins called it a great move, said that Mike Vrabel was just as good of a coach as he is a man, and on and off the field he liked him. So clearly liked him there. Tim Kelly, the Titans offensive coordinator, was on the offensive staff in Houston, so they know how to use him from that range. No state taxes in Tennessee. Hopkins is from the South. He'd probably rather be in Nashville than Boston, just as a guy who played at Clemson from South Carolina, then played for Houston. So there were a lot of reasons, and you mentioned targets. Well, the Patriots have Devontae Parker. They have Kendrick Bourne. They just signed Juju Smith-Schuster. The Titans have Treylon Burks, and as we talked a few weeks ago, nobody else. 190 targets available for the Titans based on the losses that they had last year and guys like Robert Woods and Austin Hooper. So whether it be offensive opportunity, relationships, off the field comfortability, all of the signs pointed to the Titans. And over the last few weeks, I was pretty positive that Hopkins would choose to come to Tennessee if he, in fact, didn't want to go ring chasing with Buffalo or Kansas City for cheap money. And it looks like he wanted a little bit of money, but at the end of the day, it's about $13 million a season. That's not that much money. The Titans were looking at Corey Davis to see if he would get cut by the Jets. He makes $13 million or $12.5 million a year. The Titans ended up with DeAndre Hopkins for about $13 million a year rather than getting Corey Davis for a discounted rate. So just a really great deal, really great situation for the Titans, who desperately needed that wide receiver help. This is about the best thing they possibly could have done if you had the realistic options laid out throughout this offseason with free agency and the draft.
Yeah, so pretty safe to say you think DeAndre Hopkins made the right choice by signing with Tennessee over New England.
Well, I mean, for me personally, I guess that depends on who you are. I am old school. Peter Bukowski from Locked On Packers would laugh and make fun of me for this, but I have a little bit of old school football guy to me, you know what I mean? And me personally, with the money Hopkins has made in his career, I'm going to win a title with Kansas City or Buffalo. That would be what I would have done if I were DeAndre Hopkins. But hey, again, to each their own. The guy wanted to make some money. He wanted some security, and he found the best situation possible in Tennessee. So if Hopkins wanted a payday and to play for a team that has a chance to go to the playoffs, the Titans were the best fit at the end of the day. The division, think about if you're New England. You got Buffalo. Miami's improved. The Jets are the NFL's darling this year. They're pumping them up as much as they can. I mean, if you're Hopkins, you look at that. I think it's kind of tough to go to the playoffs, kind of tough to make an impact and things like so. I think the Titans were the best option for Hopkins after he decided he wanted to, get a decent payday too. Me personally, obviously, I would have done things a little bit different at that stage in his career. Hey, but that's up to him. He wants to maximize his dollars. I think everybody listening would like to maximize their dollars too. I certainly want to do that in my lifetime. So I'm not going to blame Hopkins for that, especially when he comes to the Titans to help them win some football games.
Hey, I'm with you. I'm maximizing my dollars where I can too. So that's the smart business move. DeAndre Hopkins made that too. But you mentioned it. 2 years, $26 million here. Do you think that this was great value for Tennessee? Was it an overpay? Was it an underpay? Is it just right to you? Where are you on the actual specs of the deal?
No, I think it's absolutely fantastic because if DeAndre Hopkins balls out for the Titans, 95 catches, 1,000 yards, 10 touchdowns, each of the next 2 seasons. Well, they're only going to have to pay him $32 million for 2 years. Getting that sort of wide receiver production. Hopkins, everybody is down on Hopkins thinking, he's washed or he's regressing heavily. Last year, he only played 9 games, but he averaged 75 yards a game. So he was on pace for a 1,000-yard season in the games that he did play. So it wasn't like he took a huge step back last year in terms of his production. It was just, he didn't play as many games. So to me, Hopkins is still a high-level player that can be a 1,000-yard wide receiver. And like I mentioned earlier, Corey Davis got $12.5 million from the Jets. Right now, Corey Davis is making $12.5 million average annual value based on the contract he signed a couple of years ago. DeAndre Hopkins comes in right above him. He's barely in the top 25 highest paid receivers in terms of average annual value. I don't see how you can look at a guy like DeAndre Hopkins, what he can bring to the team. And here's a big factor, Kevin. We talked about this a couple of weeks ago. The Titans wide receiver group was bottom 3 in the NFL, if not the worst in the NFL. So it's not just that you get a guy like DeAndre Hopkins for only $13 million a season. But when you look at how destitute the Titans wide receiver situation was, not only to get Hopkins, get him at this value, the Titans are set to have $80 to $100 million in cap space the next 2 seasons because they had nobody to pay after missing out on their first-round picks for a few years. So to solve your biggest issue, just a disaster issue, and then do it with this value and do it at this time when there's not a lot of options to solve that problem. It's truly a masterclass from Titans' new general manager, Ran Carthon. And while the move may not work out at the end of the day, I think you got to give Ran Carthon his flowers for an excellent first offseason as the new general manager from the Titans. And to do this with the Hopkins move and the money that they got him at, just really incredible stuff from a first-time general manager.
Yeah, and I'll add on top of that the fact that they got him at this point in the offseason where
Yes.
it's rare to find. I still think DeAndre
Yep.
Hopkins is a top 10 receiver, at least in this league.
Yep.
So to get a player like that right before training camp starts, usually there's not a guy like that available. So
No,
I,
not
I give
often.
credit to Tennessee there. But what do you think in expectation wise, Tyler? What does this do to Tennessee's offensive expectations and maybe playoff or even Super Bowl expectations?
Well, first and foremost, I just want to say I like Jacksonville's team. I think they have a good roster. I'm high on Trevor Lawrence. A lot of Titans fans think I'm too high on Trevor Lawrence, but I think he's an excellent player. But at the end of the day, Trevor Lawrence and Jacksonville against the JV Tennessee Titans in the last week of the season. Jacksonville barely won that game on a controversial fumble call that I don't think the NFL spent enough time looking at, quite honestly. But either way, the Jags barely scraped by the JV Titans at the end of the season last year, even with Jacksonville naturally improving because they have young players who are going to get better and add Calvin Ridley and all that. I think this puts the Titans squarely in line, a dead heat. Titans and Jags going for that division. I think they're far and away better than the other two teams. I think it's going to be incredibly competitive all the way down to the wire. Before this move, I thought the Titans could maybe squeak into the playoffs, maybe wild card, or if Jacksonville deals with a lot of injuries. But I didn't think they could win a game in the playoffs. I just didn't think they were going to be that caliber of team. At this point, I think the Titans have the ability to win one, maybe two games in the playoffs, beating Cincinnati or beating Kansas City without some severe luck and maybe some injury luck, quite honestly. I don't think the Titans have enough to pull off that, but could the Titans beat the Chargers? Could the Titans beat the Buffalo Bills even? They've played Buffalo very well in recent years, despite last year's beatdown. I think the Titans could make it to the second round of the playoffs and maybe take one step further if they get some things to break their way, which is a big step up ceiling-wise from what I thought they were without DeAndre Hopkins, which was barely making to the playoffs if they get lucky.
Major shout out to Tyler and the excitement in Tennessee, obviously, for DeAndre Hopkins and his arrival. For more on Tyler's work, check out over at the Locked On Titans podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. You can also catch them on Locked On NFL here as well. Coming up in the second part of the show, we'll be diving into a conversation with Tony Wiggins of Locked On Jaguars, Evan Engram and his huge contract. So be sure to stay tuned. Plenty to dive into here on Locked On NFL. But first, this episode is brought to you by LinkedIn, and the job market can be crazy. And these days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. You want to be 100% certain that you have access to the best qualified candidates available. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs is great. It helps you find the right people for your team faster and for free. And I've used it for a ton, and my life has been a really nice resource for me, and I've had a lot of positive experiences with LinkedIn, and it's really easy to create a free job post. You add your job in the purple hashtag hiring frame to your LinkedIn profile to spread the word that you're hiring. They have simple tools you can use like screening questions, and those make it easy to focus on candidates with just the right skills and experience. So you can quickly prioritize who you'd like to interview and also who you'd like to hire. And also, it's important to start the year strong, and if you have the right team member on your team, that can help you do that. That's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs number one in delivering quality hires for sitting competitors. LinkedIn Jobs is to find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at LinkedIn.com/LockdownNFL. That's LinkedIn.com/LockdownNFL to post your job for free. So conditions apply. We're back here, our second segment of Locked On NFL on Monday. Kevin Oestreicher still talking with you here. We talked about DeAndre Hopkins in the first segment. Now we're going to get into Evan Engram with Tony Wiggins of Locked On Jaguars. Talk about his huge contract with the Jaguars and whether it was an overpay, an underpay, just right. So plenty to talk about with Tony Wiggins here now. Well, Jacksonville Jaguars pay Evan Engram 3-year deal, $40+ million. Here to talk about that with me, the host of Locked On Jaguars, Tony Wiggins, in the building. And I'm telling you, did you expect this to happen, Tony? Did you expect this deal and Evan Engram to get this much money from Jacksonville?
Yeah, I thought he'd be foolish to if they were really negotiating in good faith, I thought he'd be foolish to not take it. I thought they were negotiating in good faith. Nobody wants a player to play under the tag. They always want to be able to reduce that number because I do think the Jaguars, even though they're okay cap-wise, they could still use a few $1 million to maybe go out and get one of those veteran linemen, and you never know what's going to happen in training camp. So for me, it's just about guaranteed money. You know, people look at the overall average of the per year. I never do that. I just look and see what's guaranteed. I think it's a 2-year, $24 million deal, and that's what it is.
Yeah, and that's especially in today's league where, teams will need cap space later on down the line. And, for a portion that's not guaranteed, you take that money, you can roll it in a couple of seasons. But Tony, this is a guy, Evan Engram, that essentially signed, 1 year prove it deal with Jacksonville after a shaky tenure with the Giants, put up an incredible year at Jacksonville. I mean, what does he bring to this Jacksonville offense for the next 3 or maybe 2 years here?
He's different, especially last year. It was really, really important that they have a guy who was, and I wouldn't necessarily call him a jump ball player, but a legitimate red zone target, a bigger body since Christian Kirk isn't that big. Zay Jones hadn't really proven much, but even him at 6'2", Zay is not. He's wiry and strong and athletic. He's built like a basketball player. And they really didn't have a 6'2.5", 6'3" wide receiver that they could throw the ball to. And that's what he was last year. He was running drag routes, man, and he was lined out wide, and he was catching stuff underneath, and he was just outrunning whoever was matched up with him because he does have some of those big wide receiver traits. So that's what they're getting in him. And now what they're getting in, it is very, very important that they have a dude that they could line up in line or line up outside to create mismatches. This is the Andy Reid offense. So when you think back about it, and you think back to it, Zach Ertz was that for him, for Doug Peterson in Philadelphia. And at every stop, they've always had at least a tight end who could move around and create some mismatches.
Yeah, and I know when talking about Engram, who has, I think, established himself, especially last year, as one of the better tight ends in the league, it's a debate about whether this deal was too much money for Jacksonville to get out to him. Do you think this was an overpay, or do you think it was just right of a deal for him?
I think it was just right because I think he earned it. I'm a big guy. I'm a big demonstrated performance guy. And sometimes, we look at the advanced analytics and the stats. Other times we look at how good we think a player is and he's on a bad team or whatever. But I do believe that when you sign a guy to a 1-year prove-it deal and he has a career year, he kind of answered the question, right? And he did exactly what. And the only reason you don't retain someone like that is if you had somebody in a development and you just can't keep him off the field. But other than that, no, this was a good deal for him. It was a good deal for the team. He would have been crazy, though, not to at least, as long as, like I said, they were doing this in good faith. I think he would have been foolish to push this beyond this year because let me tell you why. Stats do matter during negotiations, okay? Yeah. Especially when you attach stats to winning. And when you attach stats to winning to a team that is used to losing, they mean even more than that. So guess what's going to happen this year? His stats are going to go down. You know why? Because they now have Calvin Ridley. So everyone on the poll, everyone in the pecking order of wide receivers has to get bumped down. Christian Kirk came in. He was a $18 million man last year, and he was the number 1. He's now a number 2. Zay Jones got paid as a number 2. He's now a number 3. That means that Evan Engram is probably option number 4, and he might be even lower than that because of Travis Etienne, him catching the ball out of. So the thing is, man, is you really, really have to strike when the iron is hot. He's not going to be any hotter than he is now because if he leads the team in receiving or if his stats go up, then that means somebody else has went down or somebody got hurt or Calvin Ridley ain't good. And Calvin Ridley is good.
Yeah, that was the huge – Calvin Ridley was the huge addition. But I feel like with the way Jacksonville performed last year, you want to bring back as many guys in that, the winning culture they established, especially under Doug Peterson. But you mentioned the Ridley addition. I loved it for Jacksonville personally. I mean, how dangerous can this Jacksonville offense be, especially with Trevor Lawrence hopefully taking another leap?
Very dangerous. And Calvin Ridley is one of those dudes that nobody's going to argue about his talent. Okay, so you can have guys like Christian Kirk, you overpay, you did that. Zay Jones out here, Evan Engram, whatnot. You ain't going to argue about Calvin Ridley. Calvin Ridley was the opposite Julio Jones and was still putting up numbers. And then when Julio got hurt, he put up big numbers. And he scares a lot of people around the league, and he has looked absolutely fabulous with the little bit that we've seen of him. And I know it's going to continue. So it's going to be a plus addition. And then what makes all of this so good is that Doug Peterson is a great play caller. And the fact that all of the dudes that they have, everybody you can think about them as at wide receiver, have the ability to separate. And when you have the ability to separate and you have a great quarterback who doesn't even really need you to separate, but now that you do, these throws are going to get easier and easier. And I think they're going to be very, very dynamic offensively.
Yeah, and it's crazy because I know a lot of teams across the AFC have made, upgrades, got better. Jacksonville's a team that is getting better. They made the trade during the trade deadline, but now that is a move where Calvin really hits the field. But, Tony, you're one of the hosts over here at Locked On NFL. I want to ask you about an AFC South move that happened on Sunday. DeAndre Hopkins going to Tennessee. Does that change anything to you in the AFC South, or is it still Jacksonville's division, do you think?
It might change something for those other teams. It doesn't change anything for me in terms of Jacksonville, because I actually think Jacksonville has arrived. And you're going to, the mentality that they have too, and by them coming from behind so much last year, you're going to have tough games. If you're going to bellyache about being in the AFC South, I'll just remind you that you're not Baltimore and you're not Cincinnati, and you don't have to play in the AFC North, because to me, that looks like, I saw something on Twitter the other day. Somebody says, if you had to spend 10 minutes fighting one of these, what would it be? They had a crocodile, a silverback gorilla. I think they had a lion in there, and then a hippo or something. And, I was like, well, what kind of choices are those? Because I don't have one of them was a grizzly bear. I'm like, I ain't got a chance against none of them. That's kind of how I see the AFC North right now. So it's like, pick your poison, right?
Right.
And I do think the other teams have to worry, because it gives them some credibility. It helps a quarterback situation that might not be the greatest, and it also helps that young receiver in Treylon Burks. Now, people aren't just going to say we're going to take him out of the game. Newt will still crush you. He'll break your heart. And you add him to Derrick Henry, you're pretty much talking about two guys that might both be first ballot Hall of Famers, and Vrabel. And then to a team that has the attitude. You got two All-Pros and Kevin Byard, along with Jeffrey Simmons. They're not going to go away as quietly as some of us think they will. But if I'm Jacksonville, I ain't scared of nobody right now, to be honest with you.
Huge shout out to Tony for jumping on, providing that Jaguars insight. And for more Jaguars insight, be sure to check him out over at Locked On Jaguars and Locked On NFL, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every single day. Coming up, last part of our Monday edition of Locked On NFL, we'll talk with Patricia Traina of Locked On Giants about Saquon Barkley. So be sure to stay tuned. A lot to get to on Locked On NFL. We're back here, our final segment of Locked On NFL. Kevin Oestreicher still rocking out with you Monday style. Thank you so much for making us your first listen every day on Locked On NFL. If you're an everydayer, thank you so much for tuning in every single day on this show. You get your array of hosts every day on this show, Monday through Friday. Now we're talking with Patricia Traina of Locked On Giants. And again, this show comes out before the 4 p.m. deadline on Monday. So if you're listening after that, there is some resolution, but right now, as I'm recording this, we don't know the resolution. So Patricia and I will talk about what could happen if Saquon is not tagged, and also what it will mean if he is tagged, coming up now. Well, the New York Giants have an interesting situation on their hands, and they have had it all offseason, in Saquon Barkley and what his contract is either going to be, or if there will not be one by the franchise tag deadline. That's today, obviously, 4 p.m. Here to talk about an update with me is Patricia Traina, the host of Locked On Giants. And Patricia, I know there's been a lot of talk about Saquon this offseason, obviously one of the best running backs in the league and a focal point of that Giants offense. But I mean, here we are, and there is still nothing to be had for Saquon. Now, maybe that changes by the 4 p.m. deadline, but assuming there's no contract for Saquon by that franchise tag deadline, I mean, what comes next for the organization and for Saquon?
It's going to be a rocky road, Kevin. Basically, if there is no contract by the deadline, what I anticipate is going to happen is Saquon is going to say, okay, Giants, see you in September. You know that famous song, See You in September? That's what's going to probably happen. Saquon is going to skip out of training camp. At that point, of course, I'm not sure what it accomplishes, because it's not like he's got any leverage left, because the deadline has passed at this point and they just can't get a deal done regardless. But it's a form of protest. It's a way to, express his feelings, because look, I don't think Saquon is going to cave to the Giants. I really don't. But I do think if there is no contract, it's going to leave a bitter taste in his mouth, considering, how much they've talked about, oh, we want Saquon here. We want him to be a Giant for life. He's important to our team. He's important to our offense and our locker room. So, the old expression, talk is cheap. Well, from Saquon's perspective, it's show me the money, show me how much you really love me, and we'll go from there. So I think absent no contract, it's going to be, there's going to be some bruised feelings.
And do you feel like throughout this whole process, Patricia, it's been more the Giants not being willing to reach Saquon's number, or Saquon's number just being unrealistic for maybe what the running back market is right now?
I think it's probably somewhere in the middle. If I had to lean towards one side, though, maybe it's Saquon's side being a little bit unrealistic. Because look, you can make a case that Saquon has been the Giants' offense when he has been on the field. Going back to 2018, he has been the offense, kind of like how Odell Beckham Jr. was the offense prior, to Saquon's arrival. But this Giants regime of Joe Shane, the general manager, while he looks at the whole picture, I don't think he puts as much stock into the fact that, what Saquon did in 2018 and then what happened in 2019, 20, and 21 before Shane got here. It's a small part of the picture, yes, but is it the governing picture? No. Shane's looking to, obviously reward the player as best as possible, but within reason, while also leaving himself room to do future deals with other key parts of the team. Because look, Saquon's important to this team. Nobody's going to dispute that. But is he the single most important part of this team? I think Andrew Thomas would like a word. I think Daniel Jones would like a word. Maybe Darren Waller would like a word. So the point is there's other guys that they have to, take care of. And they've taken care of some of them. Andrew Thomas is the next big one they've got to take care of on the offensive side of the ball. So you just can't choke your cap. As much as you would like to reward Saquon or whatever, you just can't choke your cap like that.
Yeah, no, I 100% get that. And I know, Patricia, there have been a lot of reports coming out by tons of different people about where this whole situation is, especially if Saquon doesn't end up getting the contract, in terms of maybe he will hold out and that holdout continues into the regular season. Now, you said see me in September, but is that like late September? Does Saquon hold out for a couple of regular season games, or do you think that week one he will be on the field regardless of what happens?
I would think he'll be on the field week one regardless. Maybe he won't play a full workload. But look, I mean, at that point, his only other option is to sign the franchise tag, and that becomes a guaranteed $10.1 million fee that he would get. You divide that up by 17, that comes out to roughly $545,000 he would lose if he is not on the field. So, you talk about maybe protesting or punishing the Giants. Well, if you're not on the field, Saquon, guess what? The Giants are going to get almost $1 million plus for every 2 games you miss. So you're actually helping the Giants as opposed to maybe sticking it to them. So I do think Saquon will be on the field week one. Will he play like a full workload at that point? That all depends on when he shows up for training camp. And I do think he will show up for training camp at a certain point, but it'll be really late in the process, maybe after the third preseason game, use that first week or so to get back into football shape. But I don't think Saquon is foolish enough to leave that kind of money on the table regardless.
Patricia, all the Giants insight from her. I really appreciate her making some time for me on Locked On NFL. And for more on Patricia's work, check out the Locked On Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. That's all I have for you here today, though, on Locked On NFL. Thank you so much for tuning in. Again, be sure to subscribe, follow along in audio form. It is free, no money involved here on Locked On NFL. When we get back here tomorrow, more NFL content coming your way from your Tuesday host. So be sure to stay tuned for that. We'll see you right back here tomorrow on Locked On NFL.